Thank you for being here for basic Buddhist teachings tonight. I've been asked to teach tonight instead of Chiazan. I was asked to talk about the Book of Serenity, which is a collection of about 100 koans. It was first published in 1224 by Hongji Zengui, and he was also noted in my research for being a proponent of silent illumination, which I think is pre-Dogen. So it was kind of the beginning phases of Zazen practice or Shikantaza practice. And then this compilation of koans was also had a commentary by Wangsang Xingzhu. Sorry for my pronunciation. So I found it to be a pretty difficult book to apprehend. Koan practice doesn't seem particularly easy, and it's not something that I'm very familiar with either. But before I get into the koan that I selected, maybe just in the spirit of the basic Buddhist teachings, I kind of wanted to run through a couple basic concepts to maybe acknowledge that koan practice probably shows up for people a little bit later in their practice, and that there needs to be maybe a foundation of training the mind in some sort to be able to work with these kind of logical puzzles. Might be a way of defining a koan. So the Four Noble Truths are life is suffering. The second is the cause is desire or wanting something else. The third is that suffering can come to an end. And the fourth is how to do that through discipline, meditation, and seeing. So I think it's important before we get into this to maybe realize that there's a heart to Buddhism, or that there's an intention to see the truth, and Buddhism is to see the truth, to listen to what the Buddha apparently realized. So that's why I thought it was important just to go over the Four Noble Truths, because for me this gets quite elaborate or conceptual or difficult to comprehend in a conceptual level. So I chose what's called case number 98. And it's called Dongshan's Always Close. So the case is, a monk asked Dongshan, among the three Buddha bodies, which one does not fall into any category? Dongshan said, I am always close to this. And that's the case, or the koan itself, or what should be contemplated. At this point, I would also like to say that from my understanding, koan practice is generally done with a teacher, that you're to contemplate the words of the koan and approach it with your intellect and kind of present your understanding to the teacher from that examination. And I'm kind of taking koan practice as, or my understanding of it is just another way to be aware of our minds, that you have the sitting practice of meditation to examine how the thinking process works rather than get the thinking process to do something or achieve some kind of understanding. So this is just a way that you might be more aware of how you want to fixate on what the koan means, trying to find something juicy in it, find something that somehow you lock down on the meaning. And the way that at least this book is set up, there's a lot of commentary on it, and a lot of it for me is pretty incomprehensible, as in I don't really know what it's pointing at. So I'll read the rest of the verse, which is, I think, part of the koan as well, before I get into the commentary. The verse says, not entering the world, not following conditions. In the emptiness of the pot of ages, there's a family tradition. White duckweeds, breeze gentle, evening on an autumn river, an ancient embankment, the boat returns, a single stretch of haze. So that's what's to be kind of contemplated. I found another PDF version online that I felt was helpful, for the commentary was helpful because it's just set up as like another additional line. So it's a little bit more to go into and perhaps talk about. So I'll read this one now. This one says, Dongshan's always close. The Buddha body going beyond stagelessness. Not entering the world. Pure through and through. Where is the technique to help people? Next line is not following conditions. And then the commentary, you should know there is one who is not busy. The next line is in the emptiness of the pot of ages. The commentary, from an empty pot, how can we satisfy hunger? It is always thus. There is a family tradition. In the commentary, are we born into it or do we marry into it? White duckweeds, breeze gentle. And the commentary is swaying so peaceful. The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. Is this a breeze that follows conditions? Evening on an autumn river. Commentary, day's end, year's end, such sweet sorrow, the unique breeze of reality. Next line, an ancient embankment, the boat returns. The other shore is so familiar, the wary boatman gladly pulls the barge upriver again. And last line, a single stretch of haze. My commentary, feet on the shore, head in the clouds, the solitary embankment evaporates too. An exhale on a chill autumn morning reaches out to greet the next of kin. So as you can see, it's quite poetic and maybe hard to just find something that you can grab out of there and hold onto to say that this means this, or that the author was intending for this specific message to come across. So I think it's very helpful in that way, that it doesn't really lead you anywhere. You're kind of left to look beyond the words for yourself. And just a little bit of maybe commentary on how I was taking them. Not that it's correct or yeah, even close at all, but I'll I'll read it. So the not entering the world, I thought was interesting to contemplate. I thought of Sokuzan's teachings of what doesn't arise can't pass out of existence. And I feel that that's a helpful area to look as a practitioner to maybe see if there is a spacious quality of the mind, to see if, or to question if things do arise. Like, do objects arise? Do my thoughts arise? What does it mean for something to arise? And some of this thinking is influenced by the Buddhist teaching of there not being a self, that there nothing comes from its own side. It doesn't have inherent existence, that everything is somewhat a conglomeration of everything else. So if that's the case, then what is it that could arise, or could you, can you find anything, I guess, is what comes up out of that line. Next is pure through and through. I just, again, kind of thought of something similar, that spacious quality in our mind. Not following conditions feels like it's kind of in the same thread, as far as, are there things that don't follow conditions? Next line is, in emptiness of the pot of ages. And I think I was thinking of the pot of ages as the concept of time, of the world that we're born into, and it's pointing at the emptiness of this, that there's nowhere to get, that in all of the time that has ever passed, there was never anything that, no one got it. There wasn't anywhere to get to. There is it's just empty.
Can you repeat that? I want to laugh some more. If all the time no one got it.
That there's no special aha moment, or that there's all of our striving feels a bit silly when you contrast it with the entirety of the universe. The next line is, there's a family tradition. I liked the commentary. Are we born into it, or do we marry it? Brought up for me the idea that marrying it feels like this is a mutual situation, that everything that happens to us is mutual. I can't say much more about that, but being born into it feels more like a product, like a poor me kind of feeling, like I was born into this confusing world and I'm this confused person, and I just showed up, and it just feels like a misunderstanding. So I preferred to marry it. And lastly, that I wanted to comment was it's a stretch of haze, and I think I just appreciate that imagery, taking haze to perhaps mean samsara, or that it's not so clear when we're born and raised what's happening. It's a confusing world, and it's hazy. It's just confusion, and that's what we're likely to see is more confusion. That's all I prepared, so I'd appreciate some questions at this point. Mozuku.
Mozuku bowing. Could you read the original question at the very beginning of the what you read first one more time?
A monk asked Dongshan, among the three Buddha bodies, which one does not fall into any category? Dongshan said, I am always close to this.
Mozuku bowing. Did any of the commentary seem to relate to the three Buddha bodies specifically? I'm having trouble bringing that into everything else you shared, if that shows up for you at all.
I didn't see it specifically either. I think the first couple of lines were talking about an area that maybe a formless area. And I don't know the three kayas or the three Buddha bodies well enough to tie it to one, but one that maybe isn't physically manifested was the first couple of lines. I could read those, maybe that helps. Not entering the world, not following conditions. Juzan.
Could you say something about that teaching exchange directly?
The only thing that comes up is not directly out of the content, other than just that Dongshan is saying that he's always close to it, whether or so for me, that's to the answer, like he knows it, but he's not coming right out and saying it. It's kind of a simplistic way of approaching it. That it's kind of the only way that my mind can apprehend that.
So you're saying that it is the answer to the question?
Or that's how I was taking it. Yeah, that it would be the one of the three bodies that doesn't fit into a category. Ondo.
Bowing. You mentioned spaciousness of the mind. What are you pointing to when you use that phrase, Bowing?
For me, it shows up, or the word that resonates most strongly would be the receiving quality of the mind. I think that that can be observed in the other senses too. Like with seeing, there's a sense of space between objects. It's not necessarily something that you can apprehend directly or see the space of anything, but perhaps through contrast of what appears, the different intervals between things. So I think that quality is in the mind also. It's hard to talk about, but I feel that the practice of meditation helps us get a little bit more in touch with that quality of our mind, if it could be called a quality.
Bowing. Sokuzan earlier today, and as it is, was talking about a mirror of the mind, or can't remember how he was bringing up mirror. And another, illusion. So, in what you were saying, it seemed like I wanted to ask, although, like the example of the marriage or the being born into, where is the illusion, I guess, in what we're seeing, what we could possibly be born into or marry? Well, I'm not quite catching my question, so you can let me chew on it, or,
Yeah, or the only thing that shows up for me is that it's all illusion, or anything that shows up is an illusion in the sense of it looks like something, it looks very real and very unique and different, and it is in a relative way, but it doesn't hold up fundamentally. There's nothing there, and yeah, it's illusory.
so Ondabowing, that's kind of where I think I'm trying to go, is do we see that it's an illusion? We, or any of the senses? Or is it, how does that show up when we see things are not separate or not, or are an illusion?
I'm not sure exactly, or I don't know that I see things as an illusion, but the response that comes up is that there wouldn't be anyone that necessarily sees that. It wouldn't be like I see everything as an illusion now. As far as like an understanding that you can fall back on, but I think that it's something that we would recognize that, but we wouldn't necessarily know about it. And I'm not, yeah, I get a little tongue tied in that area. I don't really know how to categorize understanding at that level if we don't know what it is, or what does understanding mean if there's not someone to understand it. Do you have more?
Thank you.
Well, Zuckerberg, along those lines, considering I like the line too, that are we born into it or do we marry it? And I appreciated your point about being born into it. See, there's sort of I don't remember the word you used, like self-pity maybe you used about it. So if we're born into an illusion and we're part of that illusion, I guess how does marrying into it show up for you if the it is an illusion?
That you are the illusion, or that's you're not some separate thing that's born into this world. You kind of are the world. You marry into it. It's the world, and you get to you are. Yeah, I don't know what else to say. Susan.
How would you respond to the question to Dongshan?
I don't know. I don't think I'd be able to take it seriously was the first response, but I think you could go at it a different way. For me, the question is just flawed to say that something falls into a category or doesn't. You're trapping the situation by asking a very specific question about categorization. But that doesn't feel very zen-y like the Jishin.
Bowing. What resonated with you in this koan that you decided that you chose that one? Bowing.
I think it was the first couple of lines of maybe Sokuzan's saying that what doesn't come into existence can't fall away, and that resonating with what I was reading, and I thought maybe I could try to talk about that at the very least.
Thank you, Bowing. So how, when we don't come to the existence in the moment of being born, how it is what makes it difficult to choose as a preference for you versus being married? I'm not sure that I'm clear. I'm just trying to get to your choice of being married into something versus being born into something.
I think that really any of us have that choice. I think we're probably gonna fight with it and think that we're born into it more than likely. So it's a bit romantic to say that we're married into the world, but it's there to point us in the direction so that we can see the falsity of being a poor self or being someone at all. Yoko.
Yoke bowing, the word in there that strikes me as close. What is that pointing at? The way it's being used there, bowing?
I don't necessarily know how it's being used in this, but what showed up was as it is meditation and Jishin's questions about, and maybe from basic Buddhist teachings with Cheizan, I forget where it comes from, but not knowing is most intimate. So close in that way that it's something fundamental that can be related with.
Yoke bowing, and then in your practice, is there something that has that kind of a quality showed up as far as something being close or intimate bowing?
Not really, or I get a little tied up in that area, or maybe how you're asking the question. Close often feels like a feeling, or the way you're asking it, it's like, are you asking that I have a feeling of that closeness? And I would say no, that, yeah, my practice just feels mostly painful. But maybe there's a closeness in that. It's just harder to describe. And I don't exactly know how you're asking it. You have more?
Yoke bowing, is there something that I guess I'm getting at what turned you towards practice?
I think it's different for everyone, but suffering and meeting Sokuzan. Yeah, I think meeting my teacher was important to see that there was a different way of working with my life, and hard to quantify that, but yeah, just having a difficult time. And
Yoke bowing, is there something that at least initially that you wanted to quantify?
oh, sure, and still do about the teacher or the practice. Yeah, quantifying is happening all the time as far as one area that shows up for me personally is kind of how afraid I am of Sokuzan, or how I like to limit my interaction with them because it's painful, or I don't really want to go in that direction as far as someone who thinks they're someone. It's painful. He points out a lot without even doing much, or at least that's my experience. Juzan?
What's helpful about Dongshan's reply if the question is inherently flawed?
Yeah, or perhaps maybe by just calling the question flawed isn't such a good idea, because it also gives space for a response to, oh, all questions are flawed. in a certain way and that they're trapped in relativity that kind of has to categorize something just by using language. Do you repeat your question?
What's helpful about Dongshan's reply if the question is inherently flawed?
I think just because the question is flawed doesn't mean that the response would necessarily be unhelpful. I think that helpfulness is going to show up in different ways for different people. These are koans and pretty hard to like say, yeah, that was helpful, or yeah.
Is your understanding that the way each student relates to that koan is different? Like, would the student come to a different conclusion, or how does that work with the teacher?
Sure, I think they'd come to different conclusions. How does that work with the teacher? Like, how would they sort through the different students' understandings? Is that your question?
I think particularly how do students understand the koan? Is there just one way? How does that show up?
I don't know classically, or I've never practiced koan, so I don't actually know how that student teacher dynamic works. I remember being pretty young and I heard the koan, what's the sound of one hand clapping, and really liked it. And somehow it was helpful to think of something nonsensical and that there was some weight of a tradition behind it, or that this is something lots of people look at. So maybe just curious about that. Can you repeat your question?
I have a different question.
Okay.
Is Dongshan's answer nonsensical?
I don't know. I think we could rationalize it as sensical. I'm not as able to do that. But I think that's more of just my wiring. I think some people could connect that right up and make a lot of sense. They could elaborate on it quite a bit. But for me, it's a bit nonsensical. And I don't mean that in a negative way. It just doesn't link up to making sense. Like, they're perfect fit to his question.
What's helpful about the verses and commentary on that brief exchange?
Yeah, it's interesting. It kind of reminds me of poetry, of there's something being pointed at, but it's really hard to see the footsteps of it, or how that's being done. So it's like something's being painted and you don't know what it's going to look like after you've done 6 brush strokes. So it's feels almost clunky, or I can't connect them to the original case, but I think it's helpful, or I think after just reading through a lot of these, that there's something interesting about it, or magnetizing, and perhaps there's something to understand. I feel that you need to practice a koan with a teacher, and probably quite a lot for an understanding to show up.
Is your understanding that the verses and commentary are pointing at the same thing as the case?
Not necessarily. I think it could go in different directions. This one for me is hard to follow. Is it talking about the case, or is it not? Yeah, I don't know. Thank you. Mozuku.
Mozuku, the second translation that you read, I could be misremembering or mishearing, but I wanted to say that instead of saying which of the 3 Buddha bodies is not categorized, or whatever the word category, that it was a different one, like stage or something.
The Buddha body going beyond stagelessness.
So to me, that seems like a very different meaning. Do they connect up in some way to you? I thought that was interesting.
It is interesting, or yeah, they feel different, but again, I can't quite make that connection.
Music bowing, does it take on a different meaning then for you with going beyond stagelessness as opposed to not categorized? They almost seem like they have opposite meanings even. Does it take, does the whole thing, I think you said that PDF, you found the commentary helpful in that. Yeah, I guess what was maybe an easier question would be, what was overall helpful to you about the second one compared to the first?
I think it was the commentary that it's kind of hard to describe how it's laid out, but it just has like the verse, and then right next to it is a little commentary that like kind of helps build up that imagery in my head that makes it more approachable, rather than just being in no man's land with something like not entering the world. What do you make of that conceptually is a little more difficult than the addition of pure through and through. Where is the technique to help people? So there's just more to work with, maybe, I think is why I liked it.
Music bowing, do you know whose commentary that is?
So at the bottom, it says Taigen Shizan, and this PDF doesn't have like a introduction or editor's preface. So I'm not really sure the setup of it, but I Googled his name, and I think the only thing that hit on Google was a student of Reb Anderson. So I think one of his students may have commented on it.
Shokadao bowing. When he says, I am always close to this, do you have a sense of always being close to this or something in that area?
I wouldn't say always. I'd say that I'm relating to it in the sense of that spacious quality of mind, which sometimes it feels like there's a closeness, or let me phrase it this way, that there's not always an opportunity to step back a quarter of an inch. There's always an opportunity to witness what's happening, to receive the world. In that way it's close, but I wouldn't say that it's like I'm walking around feeling close to it or even that I'm reminded all that much at all that there is a step back on our life.
Music bowing. Seems like you just gave stepping back or witnessing or receiving as an example of closeness, or you said earlier intimacy. Is it less intimacy, less intimate or less close to be absorbed in whatever's showing up, or what contrast would you, I don't mean to make the contrast for you, what contrast would you draw between, like, what is not stepping back or not witnessing?
Yeah, I would say that, yeah, fundamentally that's always the case. There's always a step back quality, even if we're embroiled in our discursiveness, that there is that reception always occurring. Yeah, what was your contrast again? And something else, but got lost.
Mizuku bowing, with what you just said, in what way is stepping back or witnessing related to intimacy or closeness for you?
I don't know, I guess if I were to describe it, it's a different way of relating to the world. It's not through the filter of a person, of this versus that. Yeah, and the just the aspect that receives purely. It doesn't have an agenda about how it's receiving the sound outside or what's coming in the eyes. There's no say so about that. So it's intimate in the way that that's what we're all born with. We all have that.
Yoka bowing, since we don't formally practice koans, what in our practice shows up to you like a koan?
I think the sitting practice of meditation is just very similar in the way that it helps us examine our thinking process. So when we sit down, hold still and observe what moves, more than likely we're going to be watching how we think a ton of stuff about everything, that positionality, about everything that's happening to us. And the koan might be slightly more deliberate or directed, but you get to watch it, how you make up a bunch of stories about one line that's meant to be helpful. But yeah, that's the parallel I draw.
I'm magnetized by the exchange, but I find the verses and commentary to feel discursive. But I also feel like the exchange feels impenetrable. So how can I work with that?
In what way is the exchange impenetrable?
It feels like any attempts to look at it or go into it just feels like elaboration, which is leaving it.
And what was the original question again?
How can I work with that brief exchange if it feels impenetrable and the verses and commentary feel extra?
I guess I don't see the problem. If you wanted to use either as a practice, then impenetrable doesn't sound so bad either. If you were to bring that up over and over again and realize that your apprehending mind can't get a hook in there, then maybe there's value in that. And likewise, for something where you can get a bunch of hooks in it, as long as there's some deliberateness about observing that, then I think that could be helpful too.
So you're saying particularly returning to that brief portion that feels impenetrable?
If that's something that you wanted to do as part of your awareness practice, I mean, yeah, I wouldn't say that generally, but it doesn't have to make sense as far as the practices we do. I'm thinking of the doshi practice here. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense necessarily, but we do it, or we chant in Japanese in a language that we don't even speak. It doesn't make sense. That you don't even know what you're chanting or why you're chanting. Oh, I think that there's value in that.
So regarding koan, sometimes people bring that up, and I say not as a standard, but depending on the person, sometimes I say I'm your koan. Have I ever said that to you?
I don't know. I've heard you say it at the very least.
What do you think that's about?
For me, it shows up as to, again, watch the discursiveness or to think that we know you. So I think it's trying to help us see the projections of who and what you are or what anything is. And because you're the teacher, that can then translate into other things, to realize that we're projecting over top of the world we're receiving all the time. Jishin?
Bowing. Is there anything beneficial for the consciousness in creating so many stories in response to what is arising? Bowing.
Beneficial. I think the only thing that showed up is that perhaps survival, that we're probably conditioned a little bit to be creative and use this simulation process of thinking to kind of get the upper hand and control of our world. But I think that, yeah, it feels like quite an elaboration to go further. But that's what came up. Do you have a further question on it?
Bowing. Yes, I was also thinking for a moment about the line from Sadhana of Mahamudra about ornaments, taking everything as ornaments, which Sokuzan quotes recently. And I'm wondering whether there is anything, any relationship between stories we create or consciousness creates and them being the ornaments. Bowing.
I don't know about the word relationship, kind of tripped me up a little bit there. Yeah, the stories can be ornaments. I think that's probably not gonna show up for most people for a long time because of our tendency to fight with that which is negative and to go after that which we want. So it's pretty hard to accept something negative as an ornament. So that's why that teaching is there, so that maybe we can have a willingness to look at our negativity as an ornament, or what's meant by that. Why is it valuable to look at our negativity is the question that poses to me.
Thank you.
Are there further questions? Okay, I think we can close. Thank you.
May the merit of this penetrate into all places, so that we and every sentient being together can realize the Buddha's way. Ji O San Chi Song Sang Ho Ho Sang Mo Go Ho Jam Ho Be. The 10 directions, the 3 times, all Buddhas, all Bhagavans, Bodhisattvas, Mahasattvas, the great Prajna, Paramita. O Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the 10 directions and the 3 times, please hear us. Please come down out of the light and protect Sogokoji Buddhist Temple Monastery, our Sangha, families, friends, and visitors. Heal everyone who is unhappy, sick, or suffering, and fill them with light.
We walk up. Bow to the teacher, please.